So, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to this session. For me, till now, all the sessions were very exciting. So, the digital wallets, the whole new solutions, different approaches, how to solve the identity problem. So, we are all in the identity community, small little family. We see each other everywhere. So, with that, actually, we were thinking, Robert, and when we were looking at this program, we wanted to see something more futuristic, or what's happening in the technology evolution, the trends. We want to understand how identity is playing those places. For example, the Metaverse. What Metaverse is for us, if you go back, we were in a physical brick and mortar place, then we slowly started going online, when digital shops, then we started going into immersive experience. So we have videos to 360 type of experience. And this experience is not just a commercial side, it's actually engulfing us in every sphere of our life. This change is inevitable, it's happening. It's just like, when we had for YouTube, the effect of YouTube on 4G. So when you had 4G, nobody said, why would we need 4G? 3G was working fine, you were able to use internet perfectly. But then when people saw that, video content is very useful, very effective, visual content, and 4G took off. So now we are in the era of 5G. And with immersive experiences, so which you have unlimited power of learning or entertainment or more experiences. So the big difference, or the thing which is going to happen, or at least I see it, is you have to create some personas in the digital world with more attributes. You have to describe, put more things to that person who is representing you online, because you are creating a real, like a virtual person, real virtual, and you have to be more explicit, adding more attributes to that object, avatar, for example. And then you also have to explain the rules of engagement so explicitly beyond the normal role-based access, or because you are now interacting with people, you are really talking. In my team, where I work, we are using, there's a website called special.io, which we use to collaborate. All of us have an Oculus Quest. And then my colleagues from the US and I from Amsterdam, we all join this room, virtual room. And there we do, on a digital canvas, we all have our avatars. We can even do post-it sessions together. So that's the power of collaboration, that's the power of immersive experience. And this is just one application. Imagine this extends to all spheres of our life. It starts with entertainment, if it starts with education, it starts with learning, all those experiences, healthcare, all those places. So Metaverse is going to transform how we are going to interact with each other, what kind of services we consume, share, and we have new protocols in place, crypto type of tokens which ensure a sort of security. So a lot is happening there. So we have a very esteemed panel today, and we want to hear their experiences and their point of views in 3 different themes. So we have Sarah Levassor from, if I said correct, from Capgemini. She's going to walk us through privacy aspect in the Metaverse world. And Sarah, please welcome.
So good afternoon, everyone. So we're going to start this presentation. And I have a quick question for you. Have you ever asked yourself why, as humans, we need to understand each other? The answer to that question resides on the fact that us, as humans, we have the ability, basically, to hide our emotions and also to lie about our mental state. So, basically, if we wanted to understand each other, we internalize the fact that we had to describe the emotions and the thoughts of others. For that, we start to analyze their body gesture, the way they act, the way they express themselves, and we start to collect some information about them. Because if you can identify a person, then you can connect. And if you can connect, then you can socialize. And if you can socialize as human, we can survive. So the last year, we start to grab more and more information about each other, because at the end of the day, our quest of knowing each other has led us to put our own privacy at risk. And I think we are all very familiar with the concept of privacy scandals nowadays, and it raises a very interesting question. To which extent are we willing to give information about ourselves in order to just be understood by our peers? And have we reached the level of what is acceptable to disclose to fill these purposes? With the emergence of the metaverse, the importance of answering this question has become just crucial, because the way that we are going to collect information are going to be even more intrusive. And the only information that was kept private is about to be hacked. So, my name is Sarah Levassor. I'm a privacy legal counsel at Capgemini. And my goal today is to bring you awareness about the right to mental privacy and the notion of brain hacking. So, let's start with the concept of identity. What is an identity? Identity is composed of different sets of attributes. We call that personal data in my language. So basically, with the development of our digital world, we started to collect more and more information, and we gradually accepted the fact that big tech companies will require more information about ourselves just to have access to certain services or products. The thing is, with the emergence of the metaverse, the way that we are going to disclose this information are going to be even more intrusive, as I mentioned. And if we would have thought 20 years ago that we will provide our biometric data to big companies to just unlock our phone, I don't think we would have believed it. But with the metaverse, we might have an additional issue. And what about if I tell you, will you be comfortable with the idea of wearing or using a device able to collect your brain activity, your heartbeats, or even the dilatation of your pupils? Will you be comfortable with that? Maybe yes, maybe not. But are you willing, actually, to trade these information in exchange of a better connection with your peers? This set of data is what we call biometric psychographic data. So, biometric psychographic data, basically, they are composed of anatomical information and behavioral information. And what they are doing is like basically, they capture information of your brain activity, for example, of your heartbeats, and they help you to understand what is your physical, mental, but also emotional state. I know, it's quite difficult to understand what I'm meaning. So I'm going to give you like a concrete example or maybe an illustration on how privacy is changing in the metaverse. Nowadays, if you want to connect on your smartphone, basically you can use your fingerprints. At least mine, because I don't have the last iPhone 14, so I do it still with my finger, right? So if you have like a picture of your fingerprints, you know that it's me. You can identify me with this static image of my finger. In the future, this is going to be dynamic, because the way that psychographic data are working is basically we are not looking at something static. We try to analyze your reaction to a certain stimuli at a certain period of time. Okay, I see that it's still a bit obscure, so I think it's time for a concrete example, or let's say at least our case study. So please have a look at this.
Hi, it's me again. I think it's time for me to take over. Now that we all have been onboarding with the concept of biometric psychographic data, I think you need a concrete example. So let's practice together.
As you might know, in the future, the way you will be immersed in the metaverse will be done through devices able to understand your thoughts and your cognitive loads. As an example, the company Neurable is currently developing a software which enables you to control devices by just using your minds. Crazy, right? But how does it work? Neurable is using an algorithm system that enables them to understand the user intent. By using a virtual reality device and a cap with sensor, the brain activity can be recorded and the software can interpret the neurodata to create the action.
And for what concrete application this technology could be used for? The Neurable technology could be associated with big tech companies to create headphones which could capture your brain activity and retrieve data and insight to help you focusing or building better habits. From choosing the type of music or monitoring your brain activities to send it directly to your doctor, this technology could support people with disabilities and simplify drastically our lifestyle. But the real question is, are we ready for it? Let's talk about it in the real world.
Okay, so I hope now it's a bit more concrete what I'm talking about, the fact that big tech companies are going to be able to access our brain. But I know it's still a bit futuristic for you. It's what I heard. Is the metaverse a real thing? So I'm just going to highlight something that is already happening. I think we are all familiar with the platform TikTok, either because you heard about the privacy scandal around it, maybe you are your own user, or maybe your children are. And I just invite you to just read their privacy notice. They are saying that they are already collecting your keystroke patterns in order to identify you. Because that's the thing, with keystroke pattern, you can already identify with the way that you are writing who you are behind your screen. And they are collecting this information automatically and without your consent. So imagine in the future, if this same company are able to capture your brain waves, your heartbeats, your pupil dilatation. Do you think we have the legal framework in place to protect ourselves from this invasion? Well, I would love to say yes, we are super secure, GDPR, but the thing is that we are entering a gray area. Because when we are accessing our brain activity, well, basically we are opening the Pandora box. But let's go back to what we currently have. The thing is like with brain data, as I mentioned, you cannot control the way you thought, you cannot control the way you feel when I say something to you. You cannot control it. You cannot separate how you're going to react. But privacy is the opposite. It's the ability and the right to control which information are going to be private and which information are going to be disclosed. So let's hope that the GDPR can help us. And I think the first thing that you need to ask yourself is, brain data can be considered as personal data. Because if they are personal data, then, okay, we can try to be protected under the GDPR. It's going to be a bit more quite technical, so I hope you're going to follow me. So, first question first, can we consider brain activity as brain data? The answer could be yes, of course. I mean, come on, Sarah. Like, it's the most intrusive information that you can have on your brain. But sadly not. Because personal data is an information that can link you behind it. So if I can identify you with your brain data, yes, it's going to be considered as brain data. But it's not automatically that your brain activity can allow your identification. So it means if it's not a personal data, and if it's not anonymized, basically, they are going to collect information about you without proper protection under the GDPR. And if you are a bit lucky and you have like an IT department which is very on fire and they say like, okay, we are going to at least anonymize this data, sorry to say to you, we always know that personal data we anonymized can be re-identified. So let's try to be a bit positive and say, okay, Sarah is going to be considered as personal data. We have another challenge, because is this information about your brain activity are going to be so sensitive? Do they are going to have like this very special category of data with a specific regime? Again, I'm very sorry to say to you, the question is very difficult to answer, because if, for example, this brain activity can explain a certain pathology, like for example, you have like Alzheimer, then yes, you are going to consider that it's a health data, so therefore sensitive information, and therefore by principle, it cannot be collected. That's the principle. But the thing is, what about our emotions again? What about our thoughts? What about our memory? Well, they're not really health data, but can be that considered as religion, sex? I don't think so as well, so still not possible. Maybe biometric data, if they are collected through a devices, a biometric tool who can put them maybe in this category of biometric data, but if we cannot justify that they are health data or biometric data, it means that they are just personal data. And if they are just personal data, well, it means that you don't need to have consent of the person. You can collect this information on different legal bases, such as contracts, perform of the contract for the person, or legitimate interest of a company. Well, I'm not sure we want to have the legitimate interest evaluation to collect our brain activity, right? So, okay, we say, by any chance, we can explain that maybe you can identify with my brain activity some other information so that, I don't know, my beliefs. We go back to sensitive data. And again, we have again a gap. Because if you are collecting sensitive data, as any principle, you always have exception. I'm not going to do all the exceptions of the GDPR who allows you to still process sensitive data, but I'm going to focus on one, which is very pertinent for the metaverse. If you are collecting sensitive data for commercial purposes, if you are doing it, you need to have a proper consent, which means the consent needs to be freely given, informed, unambiguous, and specific. But sadly, how can you be specific about your brain activity? How can you make sure that you are going to collect just this piece of my brain to retrieve the purposes for which you asked for it? Impossible. Can you be freely given? Not at all. Because in the future, maybe you will have to put these devices on your head or gloves to connect. And basically, you will have to trade off. Because if you don't put them, you cannot enter the world. So freely given, not even sure. And properly informed and unambiguous. Have you ever read, I don't know, any notes of your devices? Have you ever read like how your smartphone is using your data and understood? Because personally, I'm not an IT person, I'm a privacy, and even me who draft sometimes privacy policies, I'm not entirely sure to understand what is behind. So it means that basically we are all agreeing that we are talking about the most sensitive information about our brain, but still we do not have the proper safeguards in place to protect us from that. But I love to say that we do not have problem, we only have solutions. So let's focus on the positive side. The GDPR is still in place, right? And it already has some tools which can be helping us protecting our personal data. The first one is the concept of privacy by design. Have you ever heard about it? Yeah, I see some people who are saying yes, great. So it means that at the beginning of the construction of a tool, for example, you need to have privacy by design principle. It means you need to ask yourself your question. Why do you need this data? For how long is it going to be displayed? But also you are going to think about the fact that it's going to be used by a human who doesn't know anything about privacy and nothing about cybersecurity. And therefore, you need to make sure that they are properly informed when they are going to use this tool. And if you combine them with some human rights, maybe we can draft a solution which is not going to be too invasive for us. The second tool that we can use to protect ourselves is a data privacy impact assessment. I just had it mental because we are talking about our brain. So, again, I'm not sure if you are familiar, but I'm just going to get back to it. What is it? Basically, when you have like some personal data and processing activities, you need to perform an assessment if they have certain criteria. For example, if they are high risk or very intrusive for the data subject. So I guess when we are talking about our brain, we can fall under this definition of you need to conduct a DPIA. And this DPIA could help people actually to understand what will be the impact for the data subject, so for us, and how we can put in place mitigation measures to kind of balance the risk. And also they can also ask support from the authority if they have some question or dilemma that they need to do. So that's two of the instruments that we can use. Then I have two additional instruments that I propose. The first one is what I call visual contract and policy. And this one is personally my favorite one because as a lawyer, I draft a lot of policies, I draft a lot of contracts, and for me it's problematic. Because nowadays, the way that the young generation is consuming information is not about reading. They watch things on their smartphone. They watch videos. So why we are going to push them in the metaverse? Because it's going to happen. Because by 25, basically, you have at least 25% of the population who are going to be in the metaverse at least 1 hour per day. So that's the reality. It's happening. So why we still continue to draft policies of a lot of pages where we know that no one understands them and can read them? So as we've done it for traffic laws, and we have some sign, I encourage the people to rethink the way that we are informing the others. Because if we can visually understand what is happening with our data, maybe we will have less risk. The last one is neurolaw. Okay, so on this one, I just have a quick question for you. Do you think neurolaw is already something that is happening, or is something that I just invent in my own brain? What is your idea around that?
It's currently not happening. Don't know what it is. I don't know.
Okay, so neurolaw is the fact that we will have some specific rights, such as the right of mental privacy, and actually it exists, or at least it's going to be existing in one country, Chile. Chile right now is in path of having a proposition to have neural rights in this constitution. So it demonstrates really that the metaverse and this impact for our brain are crucial and real. The neurotechnologies that we are going to use are going to have impact. And when we are talking about the metaverse, I think it's key that everybody has his own personal responsibility. Because if we are waiting for the GDPR or any other regulator, I think we are going to have the same issues that we have in Web 2. So I hope with this presentation, I just put a seed in your brain without accessing it yet. And yeah, thank you very much for your attention.
Oh, thank you. That was a very interesting presentation. So we will all have avatars and we'll have two lives, digital life and physical life, and we keep interacting, and there will be blurred, these boundaries will be blurred. Okay, so you can save the questions later, but it was very interesting presentation. Thank you. Yeah. So the next presentation, so Ankur Banerjee, so from Czech. So while he's setting it up, so floor is yours.
While I sort of plug this in, I'll give a quick introduction. I'm Ankur Banerjee. I'm the CTO and co-founder at Checked. We are a decentralized digital identity company. And all of this is fascinating to look at me because my background is I worked on UK borders, EU borders. I worked with a lot of different banks on looking at their sort of technology as well, on how they do biometrics and so on. So it's come a very long way since maybe about 5 years ago when Face ID or whenever it first came out. I was working for a bank that wanted to see, is it possible to get into or full Face ID? And back then we hired the same Hollywood studio that used to work for Jurassic Park and Star Wars and all of them to do some pen testing, to a bit like Mission Impossible when Tom Cruise prints out a face and wears a latex mask and tries to get into particular biometric systems. We actually tried that, and Face ID was able to be bypassed. That's obviously a lot more effort, but things have become significantly simpler since then. So what I'm going to explain and talk about is what is identity and how it sort of relates to the metaverse. I'll tie it back to some of the other work that you heard in the previous two talks, and also try and explain why the metaverse and Web3 and decentralization are often used together at the same time. And a lot of this comes down to, like we said, like what is identity? Often when we talk about this, we sort of think about whom we are as real beings and what is our legal identity and what does a particular document say about you. And the way these sort of like checks are done right now, like Mark showed in his presentation, is you typically have some physical artifact and they say, take a selfie, take a scan. This is called a selfie scan check. It's used in many, many different scenarios. You use it at the border. You use it when you're opening an online account as well. But the problem with this particular method is that it's quite expensive. Because you are trying to trust a physical object, and now with deepfakes, it becomes even more harder to understand, like when you take a picture of a driver's license, or you take a picture of a passport, and you take a selfie, is this actually the real person who's presenting themselves? But in addition to that, the cost of doing this is quite expensive usually. So if you think about it, when you go through a normal check that your bank does, it's roughly $5 to $10. And if you're doing something like you're checking the criminal record for a person, can be up to $50 to $100. And that's because the cost of like trying either through human effort or through looking through some company with an API is quite expensive to go and check the authoritative sources. If you start looking at things like a company background where there are multiple directors, you have to run a check behind each of them. The data sets around companies are usually a lot more expensive as well. So the cost can balloon quite quickly. Now, and this isn't necessarily the same as looking at username and password. So if you think of doing login with Facebook, login with Twitter, you can sign up with any name you want over there. It doesn't actually mean that's your real identity. So the thing that a Facebook sort of like login or a username and a password is doing is just saying this is a shortcut to a username and a password. I cannot use login with Twitter to move completely off Twitter. I've been using Twitter since 2008. I've been using Instagram since 2010. Just logging in with Instagram or Twitter doesn't actually move your entire history along. So what that is described as is siloed identity. So my account history on Twitter or on Instagram is purely on that service. Now, technically, under GDPR, I could probably get an export, but it's not very usable. I can't actually go and, join Donald Trump's Twitter clone and say, like, you know what, I'm done with Twitter. I want to move across to this the greatest social media service to now exist. Can't do that. That is siloed identity because your existing profile just lives in one place. Federated is a bit like how Facebook, Google, Twitter, they allow you to log on to other services using their particular profiles, but it doesn't actually bring across a whole lot. But it just makes the act of signing on to them easier. But the model that like a lot of metaverse companies and the why it sort of like, gets sort of like linked to Web3 and something you might have heard of called self-sovereign identity is, what if that particular person, in this case me, I had a digital copy of my driver's license, I had a digital copy of my passport, or perhaps an entire digital history of my Twitter archive. I've had times when I've had to, get medical checkups done or go to the hospital, got into an accident, broke a bone, and then they gave it to me on a CD. I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? I don't even own a CD drive. But the idea is that, like, if you have information that has been digitally issued, you need to be able to keep it in a tamper-proof format and in a portable format. So portability is great because then instead of me taking a electronic or digital picture of a passport that could have been deepfaked, I could have that in a tamper-proof electronic or natively digital format in the first place. And what we specifically have been working on, because I worked on this kind of portable digital identity projects after like the sort of more traditional digital identity space. I worked with UN High Commission for Refugees, the National Health Service, the World Economic Forum. The reason why people like this is because it is natively available in a digital format. The ID checks can be significantly cheaper. Like on a cost basis, because you're not trying to see if something physical has been tampered with, and you can verify those with digital signatures, you have a bit more assurance. And there's obviously a couple of other ways in which you can go and compromise that. But what that sort of brings about to is, this is the Amazon flywheel. We've gone and replaced it with how this makes data in general more trustworthy and more portable, which is quite important when you think of like going across different metaverses. But Amazon described this as, if more people use Amazon, there's better user experience, more of them want to use Amazon, more people want to sell on Amazon, and more people continue using Amazon. And then they use this loop on the top to say, at each and every single step, Amazon is therefore reducing prices for customers. And so we think that's the same way. Once you make identity portable, what happens is, once you don't need to spend $5 or $10 checking someone's identity online, what does that sort of create? Like you have more scenarios in which you can have some form of verified information being used, because the cost of sharing a digital file is next to nothing. And so we actually ran a survey on this. This was with a pretty big audience. We've got some confidence scores on this and that you can check out. So people see this as a way of getting control back on their data, because when you ask people about it, a majority of them agree that they have no clue how their data gets used. You go on a website, you get a cookie consent. If you want to customize it, they say, which of these 236 companies that might use your tracking data do you want to share this with? You're not going to customize it. People just go with the default. And they also think this is why existing data regulations are not sufficient, because technically you have given consent. The same way that you have given consent to TikTok, Instagram, Facebook to do whatever the hell they want with your data. Now, they're not selling your data in the sense that they're not actually selling my personal details and giving it to someone, and that's the way they get away with it. They're selling access to your data. Like selling your data and giving the raw data to somebody else will destroy their business model. What they do is, they gatekeep the data and they say, you pay us and we'll tell you who is a 15-year-old kid in Netherlands who really likes Converse. So they're not selling your data, and that's why they get away from it semantically. And the reason why people care about it, we sort of mapped it out as well on a couple of various different axes, and this really applies to a lot of the metaverse conversation as well. A huge portion of it is centered around privacy. But why do companies care? And when we look at companies and why they're looking at this kind of verification, they're looking at reducing their compliance risk. So the crypto exchange that was deepfaked and an account was created, if it turns out to be a money launderer, they're in big trouble, right? So they want to reduce their compliance risk. They want to adapt to the new sort of changes in regulation. And sometimes it's not regulation. A big change that has come and sort of really destroyed Facebook's business is, I think in the last iOS update, Apple started asking people, do you want to be tracked all the time by companies? And make it a choice. And when people say no, that's become a huge problem for Facebook's ad business. So they almost want to preempt it and say, let's do privacy by design. Let's anticipate this and reduce the risk of getting kneecapped by Tim Cook. And also looking at the cost, obviously, is a big element of it. But identity isn't just legal identity. This is my Twitter profile. I obviously use my personal name behind it, and I use my face, but this is somebody that I follow who's also using their actual name and face, but they happen to be using an NFT. Now, there are a lot of people who don't ever specify their actual legal names on online forums, They're just perhaps known by their avatar, or they're known by some Bored Ape Yacht Club, which is again a monkey JPEG NFT online. Now that is still identity. Like in a lot of these communities, you might know them as their online sort of handle and interact with them as the online handle. And you'll have people who create lookalike handles similar to these and try to pretend to be you. We've had one scenario where people tried to pretend to be our company's CEO and CFO on Discord, which is this online chat channel, put them into a group chat where the other person, so our CEO was put into a group chat with a fake CFO, and our CFO was put into a group chat with a fake CEO, and they were trying to have a group conversation where they were trying to convince each other that they're all actually in the same thing. But it's very easy to do. Again, we're just dealing with handles. And sometimes it can be even more abstract. Like this picture is going back about like 10 years perhaps, when WordPress and blogs were quite popular. They have this system called Gravatar that just creates a random but unique icon just based on your image, based on your email address when you filled out a comment form. But you would come up as a unique avatar that is just generated from your email address. And so what happens is, you start looking at the privacy risks. When you have some form of online presence, you can always track that online presence. You might think that you're only known as a online sort of like identifier, like a Twitter handle or some kind of maybe Web3 wallet address, maybe it's an Ethereum address. All of that is being recorded online and is accessible for everybody to see. So you can see who the relationships are with. You can see, in fact, whom have you been interacting with. Even if the actual underlying data is not available, you can figure out a lot just by seeing who is interacting with whom. This is from an actual Facebook conference where they launched the Login with Facebook feature. This brings us to a saying. It comes from a New Yorker sort of cartoon that says, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog because you don't know who's on the other end, usually. And that happened to actually be a very, very famous Instagram dog called GIF-Pom, whom they carted out onto the stage as an actual demonstration of this New Yorker cartoon. So what does this bring us to in terms of like metaverse or virtual worlds? Whom did you meet there? So when you think of a metaverse, these are all different avatars of me. That's me as a kid. That is a sort of caricature that was being created as part of like some collection of people in Web3 that I didn't even agree to be made, but apparently it's happening. That's the picture that I tend to use online most of the time. So when you meet somebody in virtual reality, did you actually meet Mark Zuckerberg? In real life, there's some challenges to, in real time, perhaps transposing a picture or a face and lip syncing and blah blah and making somebody look like Tom Cruise in a passable fashion. When we were asked to look at like which of these Italian officers is fake, you're looking at visual cues. You're trying to see lighting, like what else is doesn't match up. So when you meet an avatar, how do you know you met the real avatar? Because this is infinitely easier to replicate, and in fact, a lot of people do. The second one is what I call the permanent problem with dicks, both in actions and actually that happens online. So Second Life is a metaverse or a virtual reality platform that has existed at this point for about like 20 decades. You'll see the news story was from 2006. And so given enough time to people, this was an event that was happening in Second Life, and somebody came and vandalized it by throwing flying penises at this person. And so for a while there was a huge infestation of flying penises. So it's not just, is somebody harassing you online? Is somebody trying to impersonate and scam you online? Just in general, if you look at the internet, because people are quite emboldened by, well, I can be anyone, you always find this, problem of bad behavior. And you can obviously, let's say, kill their account. Let's say, Facebook comes and says, well, you were sending flying penises at Mark Zuckerberg, so we are going to suspend your account. You can just sign up for a new one, right? So how do you prevent that reputation, or how do you bring across, for example, how do you bring across good reputation across different metaverses? So metaverse isn't just one thing. There's multiple platforms. There's Horizon Worlds from Facebook or Meta, whatever they call themselves now. There's Allspace VR. But the visual style of different metaverses is quite different. Like now, this obviously is not a metaverse thing, but very popular game called Roblox. Characters look like this. In a different metaverse, this is alt VR. The visual style and the design is slightly different. So what does it even mean when it says, I control my avatar and I own it and I have a digital copy of it and I can take it across to a different metaverse? What happens to the visual style? What happens to perhaps the characteristics? Like maybe these are humanoid looking characters. If there's a metaverse where everybody was a penguin, then what kind of penguin are you? And the problem crops up because we can't even get calendar and invite sharing right yet. This is something that's existed for 30 decades between iCalendar and Google Calendar and Outlook. I still have issues. So we can't get it right for simple stuff. Looking at porting your entire personality, reputation, characteristics, what do you visually look like? That is quite hard. And the last problem, and this goes back to Sarah's thing, is about, well, you could have brainwave monitoring and brainwave activity. But even before that, even if you just have a very simple headset that you're using, right now, all of your activity is quite often tracked online. So let's say you were looking at buying some shoes, you'll often find a couple of days later on Instagram, on other places, you start seeing ads for those specific shoes. I've started using it to my advantage, actually. What I do is, if I want to buy something expensive, I'll go to a website, put it in the shopping cart and leave, because a lot of them often email me a discount code. Or usually I have 5 or different other privacy blockers on, but if I'm going to buy a hotel room, or if I want to book a flight, book something expensive again, I turn all of them off. I deliberately go and search for those things and just hope for Instagram to come through, and usually it does. So that is the kind of tracking that you have right now. But imagine when it's happening in a virtual reality or a metaverse space, that will basically be like having someone follow you around with a camera all the time. It's all digitally recorded. It's like you go to the shopping mall and there's someone who is just physically, constantly following you and taking notes. So even before you start monitoring brainwave activity, there's a lot that is happening. So how do you, what sort of protection or privacy can you even have? Obviously, Mark Zuckerberg is not doing this to make humanity better. He wants to sell you ads. So what kind of intrusive ad tracking can come in once you have these? So overall, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. There's the Web3 angle, how does it port across, how identity gets involved. But hopefully across the 3 talks, you've got a bit of a flavor on what the challenges and the opportunities are. Actually, we can probably go into opportunities more later, but thank you.
Thank you. It was a great presentation. So we're now trying to go to Mars, and then you're talking about transferring your interoperability between different metaverses. So wow. So I think it will be similar to different platforms like Facebook. You have different metaverses, different providers giving you that option, and then you have you end up creating different avatars in different worlds. Okay, so if you both can come here, we have quick questions, panel discussion, please. So any questions to the panelists from the audience?
Deepfakes are already used, I think, in wartime, just to simulate destruction that didn't actually happen. Are you involved in trying to distinguish those fake videos from real ones?
Well, are we involved in monitoring deepfakes in Russia and Ukraine? No, we're not. We don't have the resources to monitor the Ukrainian news stations, nor the web there, which means that at the moment we can only detect deepfakes afterwards, which tends not to work because people already have an opinion and a mindset. So we sort of need to work together with governments, agencies to try and be quick with the detection as possible, which we try to work towards. But at the moment, no, we're not involved in the Ukraine war.
Artificial intelligence can also be engaged in interacting with those videos and try to kind of a countermeasure AI in place, just to prevent those videos from being broadcasted. Is that some idea that is already live somewhere?
So something which we are working on, we just launched a prototype for beta testing, is called Deepfake Proof. It's a browser plugin which sort of scans the images you pass by and checks it for deepfakes. And the moment that you pass by a deepfake, it tries to warn you that was a deepfake you saw. You do have to install that yourself, but that is an option.
Can I add something to that? So just on the topic of information that you can verify online, like you can detect it, we can probably figure out how to encrypt it and make it tamper-proof. It's not going to matter to an audience that already believes it. Like people still think there was a pedophile ring in the basement of a Chuck E. Cheese somewhere and Hillary Clinton led it. There is no basement in that building. So no amount of like, this is a deep fake, this is, it's cryptographically verified to be false. If you're already in a certain ideological like mindset, it doesn't matter like what the technology tells you. And I think that is also partly one of the issues when you start dealing with the identity of like, these things online, because especially if you can create like tons of very realistic looking or behavior from bot accounts or forum posts that are reinforcing, yes, there is a pedophile ring in the Chuck E. Cheese again and again and again, you can very easily get caught up in that filter bubble.
In the end, if you reinforce the same message, people might end up believing that as a true.
So, and how does this cope also with privacy in circumstances of war? I mean, does it mean other rules to be set, or what's your opinion?
I think in the privacy world, of course, we don't have the legal framework available yet. But I do also believe that we need to just resee the way that we have privacy today. Because privacy as we have it now, we just try to protect information and we protect ourselves. But we are going to evolve in a world where everything is going to be decentralized. And the way that our privacy and our data are going to be disclosed are going just to be about sharing it. So it's not going to be about, am I going to share my data? It's going to be about to whom I'm okay with. So I think it just, this change of mindset will also need to be done through IT people. It's not only like privacy people. We just need to make a change and accept the idea that indeed our privacy are going to be attacked, but on some panel we are okay with it because, for example, like if we are looking just as a Gen Z, they are really, really better than us in terms of protecting their own privacy online. They are very familiar with having fake accounts for different type of purposes. So the way that we are seeing it now is like with our standards of today. But the way that is going to be disclosed in the future is going to be quite different. And we are going to be more comfortable with the idea of sharing our information. And I think, yes, that's a lack of vision that we currently have in the privacy world, because we have more in the defensive approach rather than in the disclosing one and how we are going to apprehend it. So, yeah. We will need to have some work, but that's exciting, right?
I think to add there, like a good example is if you want to buy alcohol and you show your driver's license, actually what they want to see is just your age. We are showing everything along with it. Now what my girlfriend does is she carries around an old driver's license, a valid, legitimate document, the one that has her old address, because she has had times when she's been stalked and followed home by random nightclub bouncers. So with like a lot of these digital formats, you can say, actually, you as a nightclub bouncer don't need to know my address. You just need to know that this is my age and the government said it. The other side of that, though, is companies that are used to grabbing everything don't like giving up control. Like, so like, although philosophically I can say, oh, wouldn't it be nice if like you just asked for the bit that you need? That's not what a lot of business models are built on right now. So it's also a case of like convincing those companies on like you need to grab less data. And I think one of the ways in it which it will come about is if like we get constant like streams of like data sort of like hacks and leaks that keep on coming, and people start asking for less data to be collected. I think the other side of that is, I think, preaching to people that you need to keep your data more private is a bit like a sex education campaign that says you should only practice abstinence. People will always do risky stuff with their data, and most people don't care about getting tracked and getting ads. They love ads. So how can we do harm reduction, so to speak, and say, even if a lot of your data does get leaked, then how can you still be protected? I think that's an aspect that people need to explore.
I have a question, actually. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this session, when we are in the metaverse, we actually have to give away more data about when you are creating the avatar. You add more attributes and you give more description to what this person is looking like. It could be same as your real identity, real attributes, or it could be totally you create a totally different person. So this person, virtual person, is also visible to the others. Like, you know, if you are in this space, you see me, I see you. So we are both in the digital space. So I'm not only exposing my information to the other person, but also to the platform provider like Meta or Facebook. So privacy in this context is not the same as our perception of privacy in this real world. Because you have to use a different lens. If we use the same approach, like, you know, the compliance, the GDPR, perhaps it's not enough to actually guard the privacy and things like that. So what do you think?
Honestly, I think I loved your idea of the visual contract language. Like.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I think as well. I think the way that we as cybersecurity experts, we need to be a bit more realistic on how the world is evolving. And of course, it will require to change the way that we are also working. And I would just wanted to just highlight one thing, because we were saying like, okay, in the future, we are going to have the possibility to lie even more about ourselves. But actually, for me, the issue is already existing. Maybe it's going to increase, it's going to be easier, but I can already steal your identity quite easily. I don't know, but I can try to do it quite okay. So the problems sometimes when I'm talking about the metaverse, and especially because I'm a privacy consultant, I always have like, how can you support metaverse as a privacy person? First of all, because I believe that I might have the answer to try to mitigate the risk, but also because I truly believe that the issues that we think they are already existing. So it's just like we are scared of something because we don't have the knowledge about it. And if we educate all ourselves, then we can find answers together, because I do believe that the way that the metaverse has emerged is in response of what happened today. So we have a lack of trust into the institution. We don't want to give power to only few big entities. And we want to be more authentic and trust. That's the reason of the metaverse. We want to have trust in others. We want to be our authentic self. And if you ask the Gen Z, they do believe that at 72%, the digital online person is more relevant than the real one. So the way that we are just evolving in the metaverse, it's just like we need to stop having this barrier of what is online, and it's just like a seamless switch from the two worlds. And it means that we also need to make this switch also in our mindset of how we are going to protect that. So yeah, that's a bit my answer to that as well. Anyone else?
There's something that you can try out which is called Terms of Service Did Not Read. So it's a website that summarizes terms of service and gives them an A to D grade. So they're very good. Privacy preserving, it's a grade A plus. If it's Facebook, Google, Amazon, they're all at grade E. so I really like the visual contract thing as well, though, because it's still text. Yeah. And some of these, if you print them out, somebody turned it into a graphic novel, and the iTunes end user license agreement, and I think it was around 200 pages. It has bits on like you're not allowed to use iTunes to run nuclear manufacturing facilities. Like, okay.
Does it have a plot?
It does have a plot. Yeah. Like there are characters, they fight with each other. Like someone did it as an art project. It was quite fun. But Terms of Service did not read. Like I think that's one of the fun, like.
So you do have this for privacy statements. It's a bit, you got this website privacylabel.org where you can make your own privacy label basically. I think it's not used that much, which is a pity because the ID is good. But it's also happening in the app stores and Google, and I think Strava did a nice job. So yeah, there are some good examples, but we need more of that.
When you buy food, you check how much sugar does this have, how much protein does this have, what random crap is in here, usually in the US.
And I think also just the way that we are going to inform people are going also to change, because nowadays, like when you go to a website, you have the privacy notice of the person who is going to collect your data, but how it's going to work in the metaverse, but everything is decentralized, and in one platform, you might have like 3 or 4 entities acting on this platform. Who is going to be in charge of informing you? Are you going to have like one set of privacy rule for this environment? Or are you going to just have like each of us saying that we are going to do, and then we are lacking of transparency basically. And then as controller, we should be able to be transparent about what we are doing. So all these kind of questions are not answered yet because no one knows how it's going to evolve. But that's why we need to start to think about it, because then if we don't start about it, we just are going to have even more intrusive tools about our life. So, I think like all this kind of question about the role and responsibility, how the data are going to be shared, same thing. I mean, in a centralized world, we already have like struggle to see like where our data are going to be, but we try to have some tools in the privacy world, such as like data sharing agreements or data impact assessment, like how your data is going to have a risk if I send it to India, and we need to leverage that. But in a decentralized world, how can we know which jurisdiction is going to be responsible? Is it going to be the one of your avatar, the one of you, or the server? So all these kind of questions are not being answered yet. And of course, like the legislators are going to wait. That is sometimes a bit too late to start to say like, okay, we go for GDPR 2.0. But it's something that we already need to tackle down, because the technology is already there. People are already acting in this kind of decentralized environment, but we don't have the right measures yet in place. So, yeah.
There's actually a Metaverse conference example that I wanted to give. So I used to work for Accenture for my sins. And one of the things I started doing this year is, that is an insanely large company. They have 500,000 employees. Every year they hire maybe 100,000 people. Normally they would fly everybody to Bangalore, Chicago, or Barcelona. And so you're flying thousands of people, you're feeding them, you're housing them. So they've moved all of that training to the metaverse now. So you get shipped out an Oculus headset and you join in on training, which is interesting. It's also towards the net zero goals. So if you're flying a lot less people around the world, then your carbon footprint is lower. Problem is, you can only use an Oculus headset if you have a Facebook account. Actually, they've now kind of changed that and said, okay, you don't need to have a Facebook account, you can have a Meta account. But a lot of the times when we log on for work, we use our work logons to sign on. That's how you protect data. So given that a lot of these metaverse-like systems for work don't even integrate with your traditional work user profiles and logon systems, how do you protect data in the metaverse? Like, how do you protect, like, random people from just walking into your training? I mean, you can put it in an island in the middle of somewhere and still, like, put passcodes. You can do all of those. But it becomes very hard to control, and it is also a question of you are going there for a work event, but you need a Facebook account to get in. So I think it starts raising quite interesting questions on business as well.
So you have Facebook for work now. So I know. I just the use case you mentioned, that's exactly what we do. We have a spatial.io. It's a website. You can use your Oculus, and then you can do remote sessions, brown paper sessions, collaborate with people across wherever they are. It's a great panel. I'd like to conclude. I have many more questions, to be honest. It's really inspiring discussion, a lot of thoughts coming to me. And I believe this is happening, metaverse in small pockets, deepfakes, creation. This is happening, and we see that it will really come to maturity in coming few years. And I see this change as our technology change as evolution with more excitement. There are a lot of opportunities, of course, because of the future we don't know yet. We have all these questions, we want to know about them, what happens in different situations. But there are equally lots of opportunities, education, entertainment, healthcare, net zero, we save the planet, sustainability, lots of opportunities. I think these discussions, and like you said, if we proactively start working on these regulations or think about how we look at privacy in the new world, these things will help to create a safer, not just internet, safer metaverse, metaverses, right? So you might have many of them created, and everybody can create their big world metaverse, and we all have avatars, or in some places we leave zombies there, because you remember this movie Inception, so you go to a layer, and then if you can't really activate, so your avatar stays there and stuck in that world. So with that note, I thank all of the panelists and you for entertaining or engaging discussion, and hope we will speak again. Thank you very much. Bye.